Welcome to the Business Stories podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Darren Moore, and if you love a good story, you're in the right place. I'll be talking to business owners, entrepreneurs, and leaders from all backgrounds, and we'll meet the real people behind the business. We'll discover the highs, lows, and even the failures that got them where they are today. So get ready for an inspirational journey and let the story begin. My guest today is Mick Binnington. So Mick labels himself as an award-winning chef. He's into private dining events. He's got a cookery school. He's into property development. I mean, there's not enough hours in the day for this man. So Mick, welcome along to the podcast. It's great for you to join me.
Hi, Darren. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's great to be on.
You're welcome. So we've met through some business coaching and networking events, and obviously we've always had a lot to talk about. You've got a lot on your plate, if you pardon the pun. That wasn't meant to be intended. So tell me a bit about yourself. What is it you're doing at the moment, business-wise?
I'm trying to build businesses that work around my family life. From a young age, I worked in high-end restaurants all over the country, London, working crazy hours, always with the intention to open my own restaurant by the age of 30. That was the goal I set myself, which I achieved by 31. So I only missed the target by a year. But, if you set yourself a good enough target and you miss it slightly, you're still in a good place. But having a restaurant doesn't work overly well around family life, and I've got a young family, and we ran that restaurant for a good few years. And then I thought I need to find a way to do what I love to do, which is work with food and impress people and please people with my food, but also in a way that I have a little bit of control over my time. So that was why I set up my private dining venture.
And so how long did you actually run your restaurant for then?
So we had that for 5 years. And to be honest, it was kind of brought to maybe a slightly premature end. I mean, in an ideal world, we probably would have been thinking about starting to sort of look at selling the business. I mean, it was a strong business. We won a Michelin Bib Gourmand, among other kind of awards while we were there. We had a good, loyal following. And it was a great little business. But it didn't work for our family anymore. My wife used to run the front of house. I used to run the kitchen. She was going to need to step away from the business. It was the tail end of the pandemic. We somehow sort of made it through the pandemic by the skin of our teeth. And then on top of that, I don't know if you remember in the industry in general, in the hospitality industry, everybody suddenly left and, got other jobs and realised there was a life outside of hospitality. So it was impossible to get the staff we needed. And so, really, it brought it to a kind of premature end. So we had it from beginning of 2017 to the end of 2021 when we finally closed the door.
That COVID period in your industry, I suppose, it had a massive effect, I guess, didn't it?
Oh, it did, yeah. Effectively, that was a 2-year period of open, shut. But in between those periods, there was still a huge number of people that were too scared for medical issues or whatever their reasons were. They didn't want to go out. They were tentative about going out. So really, that was a 2-year period. I don't imagine I'm the only person in that boat, but my landlord that I leased my restaurant off didn't do anything with the rent at all. We had to pay full rent all the way through, whether we were open or shut. So any help from the government that came our way just went straight on the rent that we obviously couldn't trade to pay. So
the family dynamic and business, do you still work with your wife? And how was it working in a family? How did you find that?
On the whole, I loved it. Being in such an unsociable hours business, it was great that my wife was in that business. So we got to spend a lot of time together, even though it was working. Obviously, there are times where you have disagreements, but on the whole, I loved it. But we don't work together as such now because obviously it's very different what I do now. So my wife does help out with a lot of the kind of behind the scenes stuff, like admin stuff, replying to emails and bookkeeping and that kind of stuff. But in terms of doing events and things like that, she's tends to be sort of like obviously with the kids.
Yeah.
While I go out and do those events.
Was restaurants and food, that was your chosen career path, or did you do anything else earlier on in your career?
From a young age, I've never been shy of hard work. Love to be able to go out, work hard, save up money. We're probably talking about from 10 years old onwards. Obviously, you wouldn't get away with that these days, but I kind of had 2 paper rounds, one in the morning, one in the evening. So I've always been a bit of a workaholic, but I never really intended to be a chef. It wasn't until I was about 13, 14 years old. A few of my friends had started working part-time in a restaurant, doing a bit of waiter and waitressing. And they said, "Look, why don't you come along as well?" So I went along, but I naturally just gravitated towards the kitchen more because I didn't really want to be necessarily dealing with the public. I gravitated to the kitchen, started a little bit of washing up, and then before I knew it, got involved in, preparing starters and desserts. And then it kind of, from that point on, I'd say it just kind of snowballed. Like that naturally led me to then go into a kitchen for my school work experience. Off the back of that, they offered me a job for all the school holidays while I remained at school, and then an apprenticeship as soon as I finished school. So I could get exactly the same qualifications, work based, as what I would have got by going to college. So again, that was a no brainer. From that point on, I still didn't have any really serious aspirations with it, but the executive chef kind of took me under his wing. Amaro Gallucci, his name was, an Italian chef. He moved me to the London sort of head office where I started doing the director's private dining and hospitality. So it was much more fine dining. And then he pushed me into some cookery competitions, like international cookery competitions as well. I did quite well in those competitions. I got a gold best in class, best in category at Hotel Olympia in London. I got a bronze at the World Culinary Olympics in Germany, and a few like silver and young chef of the year at Ascot. And this was all at about the age of 18, 19. And at that point, the old imposter syndrome started to creep in a little bit because I got offered a few little opportunities. Like, for example, the Daily Mirror got in touch and they were doing a feature called Up the Ladder. And they invited me to Hoxton in London for a little interview and, some photos and whatnot. At that point, I hadn't even scratched the surface on the sort of knowledge that you need as a chef. And I felt like a bit of a fraud. Like, here I am, sort of winning all these competitions. And didn't really have the knowledge to back it up. And I started to sort of fear that I was going to be found out. At that point, I decided I needed to sort of get into it properly. So started applying for Michelin star positions in Michelin star kitchens. Probably nearly 18 months of applying and getting rejected on the basis that I didn't have Michelin experience. Of course, the obvious answer is, how do you get Michelin experience if you can't get your first job? But nowadays, I'd have a different mindset to that, and I would go and work in the kitchen for free until I got the job. But in them days, obviously, that didn't kind of enter my mind. Eventually, I got myself a trial at a place called Chapter One, just on the edge of Bromley. That was Michelin star, 4 AA rosettes at the time. And I did a trial there. Halfway through the afternoon, the chef, the boss, invited me for a private chat. And he said, "Look, I've got a position for you at our sister restaurant," which at the time I think held a Michelin Bib Gourmand 3 AA rosette. So by no means was it a bad place at all. But I was adamant that I wanted to get into a Michelin star kitchen. And he said, "You could start there, see how you get on, and then move over." And I said, "Look, I really want a job in a Michelin star kitchen." He said, "Well, I've got nothing here for you at the moment." I said, "Okay, all right." So that was the end of the chat. And then as he was leaving, I said, "By the way, chef, is there any chance that I could just stay and help with dinner service?" This was a fully booked Saturday night. And he said, "Yeah, of course you can." So I stayed, did my best to get involved, be as helpful as possible. And then at the end of the shift, he pulled me to the side and he said, "Most people would have just gone home at the point they were told they wouldn't have got the job. It impressed me that you stayed and worked hard even though you thought you didn't have the job. So if you want the job's yours." So that's how I got into my first Michelin star kitchen. Yeah.
There must be 99 people out of 100 who would have just taken that on the chin and gone home. But that's the difference, isn't it? Of that 1 in 100 is the person that goes the extra mile, as you did, and look at the results it's got you.
Yeah, well, exactly. That was a good lesson to learn quite early on, because bearing in mind, I think I'd only just turned 19 at the time. It wasn't premeditated at all. I didn't expect that outcome, but once I got that outcome, I thought, right, there's a lesson there. If you go the extra mile, it can open doors.
And the imposter syndrome you've mentioned, I've been talking about that a lot recently on some of my other interviews. It's a very real problem, isn't it? And so many people underestimate themselves, and it's like that kind of lack of self-belief that almost holds you back, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, and to be honest, I don't know if it ever really goes, because you're always reaching for the next level. I certainly am. I'm always thinking, what's next? What's the next level? And you've always got those doubts. Can you do it? Fast forward in probably about 10, 12 years or so, I got a head chef position in the Gordon Ramsay group. And again, I had that kind of imposter syndrome there of even though the restaurant before, my first head chef position, I'd won a Michelin Bib Gourmand within the first year at the age of only 27. Even then, I thought, am I really good enough to run a kitchen for Gordon Ramsay? But as they say, feel the fear and do it anyway. I weren't sure. I thought, worst case scenario, I'll go in, they'll say I'm not good enough and I'll be kicked out. But fortunately, it went well. And then when the opportunity to take on my own restaurant came about, and I had to have the difficult conversation and say that I was giving my notice, they actually made a real effort and threw quite a lot of very generous offers at me to stay. So that kind of speaks volumes in the end.
So, with regards to going on your own, making that break, starting your own businesses and stuff like that, have you always had that kind of entrepreneurial flair and drive, or is that something that came a few years later in your career after you got your experience under your belt?
Since the age of 18, genuinely, I can remember the day. Sounds cheesy as hell, but I'd got home from work. I was watching telly, and a Gary Rhodes program came on the telly. I can't remember what the dish was he was cooking. I can pinpoint that moment. I thought, I want to be successful. I want to try and achieve that kind of level of success. Probably a bit before your Jamie Oliver and Gordon Ramsay really burst onto the scene. And Gary Rhodes was like, he'd won Michelin stars, he'd had his own restaurants, he was on telly, he'd done it all. And it was at that moment, really. And then when I got my first job in a Michelin star kitchen, from that point on, I don't know what made me say it to myself, but I always said, I want my own Michelin restaurant by the age of 30. And I never knew how I was going to get there, even by the age of 29. I still had no clue how I was going to get there, but I was just adamant it was going to happen. And then it's so funny how it did come about in the end, because I'd almost kind of given up on the idea because I'd passed 30 already.
The power of positive thinking. I mean, they say if you believe in it and you know you're going to do it, you're going to find a way. And it sounds like that's exactly what you've done.
Yeah, I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to it. Well, I was just over 30 at the time, let's say, and I was, like I say, running one of Gordon Ramsay's kitchens. And my dad phoned me up. He said, I'm working around someone's house, and an old bloke's just turned up on a bike, moaning that he can't find anyone to take on his pub. I've taken his number. Here's his number if you want to give him a call. I looked up the place. I thought, yeah, that could work. I called him, and the rest, as they say, is history. That became my first restaurant.
Excellent. You just never know, do you, where that opportunity is going to come from? And even
No,
like you say, you're not looking for it, and they just turn up, don't they?
yeah, exactly. I was well and truly settled into the Ramsay group at that point, and there's good career prospects. Lots of head chefs from Gordon Ramsay have not only gone on to be very successful names within their own kind of restaurants, like your Marcus Warings, your Mark Sargent, Angela Harnett, all those people, but also within the group. I mean, take like Stuart Gillies, for example, who was the CEO when I was there. He started as head chef at Boxwood Cafe back in the sort of the early noughties, and wound up as the CEO of the group a few years later. By the time, like at the time I was there, so that I'd pretty much settled in to let's build a career with Gordon. Fate had different ideas.
So the private dining then, was that created coming out of COVID and the wrapping up your restaurant, and then the private dining was something that came next? Is that how that evolved?
It wasn't really premeditated at that point. We closed the restaurant. We had a lot of very sort of loyal, regular clients, and they started reaching out and saying, "Oh, where are you going next? Where can we get your food?" And I, almost tongue in cheek, started saying to them, "Well, come and cook round your house if you want." And a number of them took me up on the offer. To my sort of surprise, like I say, it was kind of said like tongue in cheek. But yeah, and then kind of I realised, well, I can cook exactly the same food for the same client without all the overheads. When you have a restaurant of that sort of size, we were probably talking, we were having to do 10 grand a week before we started to make any money. That's quite a big commitment to sort of wear around your neck. We were a small team, so it very much fell on my wife, as I say, ran the front of house. I ran the kitchen. We had part-time people that sort of worked and helped around us, like on the bar or washing up or a bit of like waiting. The fact that I realised at that point, hang on a minute, I can do all this without having that level of commitment holding me down. And I'm the sort of person, I do get quite bored as well. So I absolutely relished the challenge of working towards that restaurant. I loved setting it up. I loved building it. I loved achieving the awards and everything. But once it did kind of get to the point where we'd refurbished the whole site top to bottom, we'd done everything we set out to do with it, it did get to the point where it sort of became like I'd bought myself a job rather than a business by that point.
So the private dining then, is that something that you're still doing a lot of? I know obviously in the last few weeks you're just launching your cookery school, which I've seen all over the socials, which we're going to talk about as well. But you're still doing the private stuff as well in addition?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all my clients are amazing, and I've been fortunate to cook for quite a few celebrities through it in their houses as well. Got into that using kind of the lessons learned. I kind of approached a couple of them and offered to do the dinner for them for free, just in return for a little bit of social media exposure on their networks. And to be honest with you, that then led to returning, those same celebrity clients returning for fully paid for events. So again, and obviously that helps with profile. But yeah, still very much doing that. I've got a very busy couple of months coming up with it. Actually, a couple more bigger names in the pipeline over the next couple of months as well. Still doing that, but also I can always remember one of the Gold Circle big business events that we attended, the mentoring that we attended, when Mr. Motivator came in. And he said one thing that stuck with me that he said, very inspirational to be honest. But one thing that really stuck was when he said he doesn't wait for his boat to come in, he swims out to it. That really stuck because the amount of kind of private chefs out there that will just sit and wait for the phone to ring. If they're not busy, they're just not busy. Whereas what I do is go out to venues and sort of say to them, look, I'll come here, I'll do a pop-up dinner. You take the drink sales, I'll take the food sales, whatever it may be. If the calendar's looking a little bit empty in any given kind of time for the actual private dining, then I just go out and set up pop-ups to fill in the gaps. And it works really well. And then off the back of that, then you inevitably get more private events. I do like a vineyard, which is also a wedding venue. So they're a working vineyard. They produce award-winning wines. We do supper clubs over there. And then off the back of that, I'm getting a lot of inquiries for weddings. So now weddings is something we're kind of factoring in a bit more as well, ready from next year. I've done a couple. I've always targeted the more smaller scale stuff because most caterers don't want the smaller scale stuff. So that's kind of my niche. But now we're naturally being pulled into the wedding side of things as well. I've just launched the cookery school. I've also got a little coffee shop, which I turned into a small plates venue in Malden and Essex as well, which is also where the cookery school is. Keeping myself busy. Basically, what I'm doing is building the foundations of all these little businesses, and then there's no pressure then for them to really perform big numbers. They all just tick over with a small team, but the foundations are there. They can organically grow, and I can bring people in as they grow. Before we know it, we'll have 4 or 5 very successful businesses. Well, that's the plan anyway.
That approach to going out and doing stuff for free and, almost volunteering to get yourself on people's radar, that's a really great lesson for anyone in business to learn. Do you think people make that mistake, not necessarily in your industry, but in business in general? They just sit there waiting, like you said, they wait for the phone to ring or they wait for the next big opportunity, and it doesn't come unless you go out and find it, does it?
Yeah, I definitely think that there's undoubtedly people out there that would never consider just doing something for free. But the thing is, if there was someone that's got 1 million followers on Instagram, I would offer to do a dinner for 10 people for free. Now, that's a bit of my time, and then that's the cost of ingredients for a 3-course dinner for 10 people. So, worst case scenario, it might cost a few £100. But now, if you want to go and be endorsed by a celebrity and put out to 1 million people in any other way, like by advertising, you're going to be spending way more than a few £100 to get that endorsement and put out to that many people. So you can go and spend £100 on a Facebook ad. You might not get any results whatsoever from it. Well, I know for a fact that I've got a lot of results of people saying, oh, I saw you did a dinner for such and such. And then, of course, on top of that, if you get free dinners for 10 people directly off the back of doing a free dinner for the celeb, you've got them going and telling their friends, word of mouth. So for me, it's just a no-brainer.
I think anyone who's listening, that's almost a light bulb moment. I think you've probably given a bit of inspiration to one or two people to try something similar in whatever industry they're in. So the cookery school, then, I've been following you on the socials and I've seen you developing it and starting it. And how's that come about? And what does that look like? What's your kind of aim and what's your target audience for that?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. But the funny thing about it is what this was born from is that I actually wanted somewhere ideally suited to recording cooking videos. My home kitchen, I've got young kids running around all day, mess everywhere, and so I thought, really, I need some sort of studio kitchen. And then I thought, instead of just going out and taking on an overhead for a studio kitchen, what I could do is set up a little cookery school, which is laid out ideally as a studio kitchen at the same time, and then actually get the cookery school to operate as a business. It's a stunning venue. I mean, it's a converted barn in the countryside on the outskirts of Malden. It's just surrounded by beautiful countryside. Malden's a lovely place, quite a foodie area as well. So not only do I do cookery classes for home cooks of any ability level, which is kind of the kind of core base offer, if you like, but also I've designed it in a way so it's like an interactive chef's counter. So that opens the door to being able to do like interactive chef's table experiences as well, where people don't have to come and actually get hands on. They can just come and sit and enjoy a 7-course meal, cooked and plated and served in front of them, and actually ask questions if they want, chat if they want. So we've got that. It also opens the door for private hire. I've kind of sort of come up with a little tagline with the private dining of your place or mine. We can take the food and our service exclusively to someone's home, but there's a lot of people out there that love food but wouldn't necessarily want a chef to come and serve in their home. So now we've got the ability to say, or you can come to us and hire our venue and we'll cook exclusively for you in our venue. So it opens the door to that. There's corporate team building events as well. Groups of employees from a business or whatever can come along and have a team building day, whether that be a hands-on cookery lesson, whether it be a chef's table experience, whether it be a demo and dine where literally I just demonstrate some recipes and then cook for them. Really, the possibilities with it are endless.
The first thing that springs to mind is there is simply not enough hours in the day for Mick Binnington. How on earth do you manage to fit all this in?
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, first of all, I love it. There is that kind of old cliche as well of sacrifice now in order to not sacrifice your future. Like I've got, yeah, I am working quite hard at the moment, but I'm doing that because I'm trying to build a good, solid future for my family to be able to take the kids on holidays, and to be honest, it's tough out there at the moment as well. Like not only in business but just in life. And also, you'll notice I've got 4 or 5 different kind of businesses, but they all actually stem from my original restaurant. So my original restaurant was a pub restaurant with rooms. So now I've gone out, I've got some mentoring in property and learned how to do service accommodation properly, and realised by getting that mentoring that I wasn't getting anywhere near the full potential out of the rooms we had at our restaurant. And I wish I'd kind of known at that point all the stuff I know about that now. We've got the service accommodation, like holiday lets. We've got the coffee shop / small plates in the evening. Well, obviously, we know how to do nice coffee and stuff. We used to do it at the restaurant. So we used all the same contacts, all the same suppliers, and set up a little coffee shop. The private dining, it's just an extension of what we used to do in the restaurant, except we just take it to our clients instead of them coming to us. And then the cookery school is a slightly new element. They all interlink back to it's just hospitality at the end of the day, all of it.
So I'm guessing with all of these different things on the go, have you got the support of one or two people behind you? Obviously, I'm guessing you've got staff around you. Have you got a little team that helps with all this?
My wife helps out with organising, like sending menus over to people, organising their menu choices and all that kind of stuff, and bookkeeping. So she does a brilliant job, like helping out with that kind of stuff, which then frees me up to actually be out there doing what needs to be done. I've just got a little pool of people, a lot of them who've worked with me before at my restaurant, that just come along as and when on a self-employed basis just to do like the front of house side of the private dinners, because unless it's a really small dinner, anything kind of 6 people or above, I always take somewhat like a host as well. So I'll cook and someone else like looks after the table. I've got obviously a couple of people that work at plates. So yeah, a few people, but really it's a case of as it all grows. At the moment, like for example, at the moment, plates is only really open a couple of nights a week. The cookery school, literally, I can look at the calendar. I've got a big wall planner on the wall in front of me, and I will literally look at the calendar and go, right, these are the dates I've got private events. Let's put these cookery classes on these dates. Let's open plates on these dates. So at the moment, I'm kind of doing it all, but working it around each other. But that's just to take the pressure off, because what I don't want to do is go all guns blazing, take on teams, and then things are not going right. People leave, and then you end up chasing your tail. I prefer to let it grow organically and bring people in that can do everything. So, for example, if I was to bring a chef in, I'd want to bring a chef in that can help at the cookery school, on the private events, and at plates, and become an extension of me rather than just bringing a chef in just to do plates, for example.
One probably common mistake that a lot of businesses make is almost growing too quickly, taking on all the expenses and all the overheads very early on before they've actually gained any traction. So it definitely sounds like you're doing it the right way around. Build up the business first, and then when you know it's sustainable and ready, then you can put more investment into and more people and more resources, I guess. In terms of your school then, is this generally one-off clients, or do you do something where someone could come back on a regular basis and register for some kind of a course with you? Is that a long-term investment they can do, or just one-off?
There's plans to bring stuff like that in. I mean, for example, at the minute it's kind of targeted more at home cooks, but also there's the option to be able to bring in courses for professionals as well, because I know from having my restaurant on the odd occasions, going back to the windmill that I had a few years ago, on the odd occasions where I did bring chefs in, it was very hard to give them the level of time and care and training that I wanted to give, because a lot of the time I was on my own in that kitchen, and we could do up to 60 covers, Michelin level, and I was on my own. So I was literally running morning, noon and night. And then to try and bring someone in, their feet kind of almost don't touch the ground and they're kind of like shell shocked. So in an ideal world, I would have liked to be able to give some of that training in a less pressurized environment, rather than straight in at the deep end. And that is something that could possibly help other businesses, that we could offer and teach them in a less pressurized environment, so that at least they kind of hit the ground running a little bit.
I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of different opportunities there. I think so many people are going to be inspired by what you're up to and the way that you're approaching it and what you've achieved. It's fantastic to hear, and I'm really pleased for you. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, if they want to work with you, if they want to use your services, how can anyone get hold of you?
I am on LinkedIn, just simply as Mick Binnington, and then or my website is probably a good shout. So my website is www.chefbymb.co.uk.
Perfect. That's great. Well, look, thanks very much for joining me, Mick. I'm going to let you get back to your day because I know you're a busy man. And I look forward to seeing you again real soon.
No, thanks so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. Thanks, Mick. So there you go. Another great story to add to the collection. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please check out my other episodes. And remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your friends to help the podcast grow. I look forward to seeing you on the next Business Stories podcast.